loves, and welcome back to Your Hero's Quest, the show where we talk all about mythology, legend, history, and tie it in with self-development right here and now in the present age. Today we're going to be discussing the Faery Accord, which was this ancient sacred contract between humans and the realm of fairies. And I came across this book, The Lost Book of the Grail, The Sevenfold Path of the Grail, and the Restoration of the Faery Accord. This was written by Kathleen and John Matthews, who are two Arthurian and Celtic scholars. This includes a new translation of the 13th century text, the Elucidation of the Grail. Basically, this text is a prologue to all of the Grail myths and writings that we have, study, and love today. The reason this work was so interesting and magical and really eye-opening is because it offers this alternative reason for the Wasteland that is so relevant to today. So what is fairy? What is the fairy realm? Who were these fairy people, the fae, the fairy folk? We're talking about fairy in the ancient term of F-A-E-R-Y rather than F-A-I-R-Y, which is what we often think of with fairies, these little winged beings who are in gardens and forests and sprinkle pixie dust. But fairy refers to an actual ancient race of beings that once existed alongside of humans. And this race was actually super real to medieval writers and to the whole spirit of the people in medieval times, because it was passed down through this like folk spirit and folk legend. And as the authors say, in medieval literature, and especially within the Arthurian legends, the gap between our world and the realms of fairy has always been narrow. King Arthur himself was raised by a fairy woman. Lancelot was raised by a fairy woman under a lake. The knights are constantly interacting with the fairy realm on their quests in terms of fairy maidens and castles that they find and then can never find again. This veil between the worlds was always very thin. This is even mentioned in the Canterbury Tales, which was written a little bit later in 1387. The wife of Bath's tale, the very opening, she says, "In the old days, the days of King Arthur, he whom the Britons hold in great honor, all of this land was full of magic then. And with her joyous company, the elf queen danced many a time on many a green mead." That was the old belief, as I have read. I speak of many 100 years ago. But now elves can be seen by men no more. For now the Christian charity and prayers of limiters and other saintly friars who haunt each nook and corner, field and stream, thick as the motes of dust in a sunbeam, have seen to it that there are now no fairies. So this race of beings inhabit this other world, this parallel world that is existing alongside of ours, only we can't see it. Although there are many legends of people who have accidentally encountered fairy or fallen into fairyland, and they always say never eat while you're in fairyland, otherwise you'll never come back. Anyone who has been brought into fairy and finds their way back to our realm, many hundreds of years have passed because the time works differently in that realm. So where did these fairy beings come from? Opinions differ as to their true origin. Many believe that they were originally pagan gods, like the Irish Tuatha De Danann, who were these great spirit beings, interdimensional, that came to populate Ireland many centuries ago. According to the authors, some insist they were ancient pagan gods, diminished as other beliefs overcame them, who lost their original power and were remembered less and less as time passed. So this is how stories began to be told of them living under these fairy hills, and then they very rarely are ever seen anymore. So that is a little bit about the actual realm of fairy that we are referring to. And it must also be noted again that this is a realm of timelessness, and it's this eternal realm because fairy is synonymous with the earth, with nature, and with that essence of life itself. And interestingly on that, a quote from the book, "The questers miss time and again because they are still trying to apply the rules of ordinary time to timelessness. It is only by entering into timelessness that the quest is gained." We often try to find answers to things in our lives in this 3D world of time, which is like in our mind. And we try to reason out these problems and issues that come up, but can't really find the answer, go round and round and round and get anxiety and all this stuff. But really, when we drop into that realm of timelessness, into our heart, into our higher self, that's when we're given the answers that we're seeking. So we also must quest into this realm of timelessness to achieve our quest, to achieve our mission, and to get guidance and answers to things that we seek. So what now is this fairy accord? As I mentioned, it is this sacred contract that once existed between humans and these fairy beings. This was many, many years before King Arthur even existed, King Arthur and his court. So we're not given an actual time frame of how long before, but there is a significant gap. So this accord was really about sacred hospitality. The rules of this accord include speak kindly, never strike, respect mutual boundaries, never show greed, do not steal, keep your word. As soon as one of these is fractured, it breaks the accord, and from this point, friendly relations cease. So the original mission of the Fairy Accord is very simple. The act of sharing food or drink renders taker and giver into friends by the act of hospitality. Louis, the Chevalier de Jaucourt, describes hospitality in his Encyclopédie, I think this was in the 18th century, as the virtue of a great soul that cares for the whole universe through the ties of humanity. So that gives it an even more deep and sacred meaning that everyone is part of this great whole. Many ancient cultures around the world involved welcoming a stranger in and offering them food, shelter, and safety. In places like ancient Greece, the host was expected to make sure guests' needs were met, and the guest was expected to abide by a set code of behavior. This was called xenia, and it was sacred to the ancient Greeks. These accords are similar to the Fairy Accord. The Fairy Accord is kind of like a human accord as well, this innate accord that we make with each other when we give someone our word or host them in our home. The Fairy Accord was also an accord between the divine feminine and the divine masculine that once also existed and has been thrown radically out of balance in our modern age, and in this tale, as we shall see. I touched on this story a little bit in my Sacred Feminine episode, but basically what this accord, how it presented itself in this time long before Arthur, was travelers would come across these sacred wells, and out of the wells would come these beautiful fairy maidens that would offer the traveler hospitality with a beautiful meal, drink, food, a napkin, whatever this traveler needed and wanted. And this was unconditional, again, without reward. They would just arise and provide this service. So how did this accord get broken, you might ask? Well, unfortunately, an evil king was riding by, and his name was Amangons. And he saw this beautiful maiden arise from the well, and he decided he wanted her golden cup for himself, and then he also wanted her for himself. So he and his knights raped these maidens of the wells and then took them off to be their ladies. This caused the wasteland that I mentioned, and the wells dried up. Their voices were no longer heard. These maidens no longer came out of the wells. This link to fairy was severed, and the land became barren. The lushness of the forest diminished. The rivers and the waters ran dry. So it really just has these grave, grave consequences. These self-serving actions by this king and his knights ruin everything for everyone. So we're split off in this moment from our fairy roots, from nature, from these voices of the eternal and of Mother Earth herself. So many, many years later, many centuries, we don't know how long, the Knights of the Round Table get wind of this horrible thing that had happened, and they swear to avenge these maidens. These were such good knights, so worthy, strong and proud, so vigorous and hardy, that as soon as they heard the story of this adventure, they vowed to recover the wells, all swearing together to zealously guard the maidens who had come forth and the cups they carried, and to destroy the lineage of those who had done them harm, who had stopped them coming out of the wells whence they came no more. So they ride onto a quest into the forest looking for any semblance of these maidens or knights that they can question, and they do end up capturing this knight called Blaharis. And unfortunately, the knights find out that Blaharis and these other maidens that he's traveling with and other knights are descendants of Amangons, but also of these maidens of the wells. So if they wanted to hold true to their original cause, they would have to destroy these maidens. So they have to kind of change course a little bit. So Blaharis, the other knights, and these maidens wandering the forest aren't the only descendants of King Amangons and these maidens of the wells. What happens is this company called the Rich Company come out of the wells, and they represent greed, violence, self-service, the opposite of compassion and hospitality. And they set themselves up against King Arthur and his knights. They set up the Proud Castle, they set up the Castle of Maidens, they set up this perilous bridge, and they kind of take over parts of the land and just build these little towns. So the knights now are engaged in these wars against the Rich Company for 4 years. So they're cut off from questing for 4 years because they're distracted by this warring and these horrible people. This is keeping them stuck in these negative realms, in the 3D realm, cut off even further from that timeless eternal realm. I thought this was so parallel to today. The Rich Company totally represents like corporate greed, self-service, the negative aspect of money, how it can rule and degenerate people into really evil places. We today get cut off from or distracted from following our spiritual path, or fully developing our spirituality, or following our purpose, our mission, our quest, because we're so distracted by the system, by the media, by having to work to make ends meet. How can we vanquish the Rich Company and get our land back? Because we are very much in a wasteland. I think that it's getting better, but the ravishing that we've done to Mother Earth, and how we've mistreated each other through wars and just discrimination and focused on the wrong values, has led us to where we are today. And it's that separation that happened after the breaking of this accord. And the authors also allude to even that original myth of Adam and Eve eating that fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, causing this separation from the divine. So it's that continual seeking of coming back into that state of Eden, that paradise on earth, which we absolutely can have and can bring back. As I touched on a little bit before, the accord is not only this accord between us and fairies, us and the land, but it's between each other. That sacred bond that you make with your word, that unfortunately, obviously we are only human, but many break. And there's this one last tale where this visitor shows up in King Arthur's court with this drinking horn and puts all of the members of court to test. He says, whoever drinks from this horn and is faithful will be able to finish it no problem. Whoever has been unfaithful to their husband or wife, it will spill all over them and their clothes will disappear. So they'll be embarrassed in front of all their friends. Unfortunately, nearly the entire court is left embarrassed because no one is faithful except for one couple, Carados and Guinier. They restore this trust of faery in humanity because they have kept this sacred bond and accord with each other. The evil effects and consequences, implications of the Rich Company are seen so deeply everywhere. Not only that sort of violence, greed, and corruption, but as the ages turned from this way of living with the land and art and beauty of like that flourished during the Renaissance to then the age of enlightenment and reason, we start to see this moving away from the heart space into the mind space that sort of overtook like all of societies. Pursued knowledge obtained by means of reason and evidence of the senses. We're so much farther from like those wells and knowing in our hearts of that feeling of that divine feminine to this more like masculine patriarchal way of looking at things, of logic and just reasoning with science, and that is the only way. That then leads to the Industrial Revolution, which is that economic expansion. I think maybe that was the real turning point for a deep severance with the earth, as all of these new mills and factories are set up and cause so much pollution for these mill owners to make money and to use people, these workers who are so poor and just in horrible health because the conditions are so bad at these factories. I've always thought about this too, like looking at architecture of the modern age versus even not that long ago. But art or architecture used to be like art. It was so beautiful. It blended in with the land. These like palaces and chateaus or even cottages look like they belong. And they look so inviting and hospitable. Like you want to have a glass of wine there or a coffee or a tea, and maybe you'll meet some gnomes in the garden. But now you look around and it's like these slabs of concrete with windows that are just so cold and uninviting. So I think this like breaking of the accord is reflected all around us. So how do we heal this broken accord? This contract that was broken that has had consequences all the way down into our time. As the authors say, this communion between fairies and humans is this wisdom that it pervades the neighborly consideration of all life that arises in human awareness. Those who offer and drink from the cup in peace are children of one universe, in communion with the natural world as their ancestors were. And it's healing this wasteland brings us back into communion with our ancestral belonging. We are all part of this earth. We are literally all one of the same. It's by following our own quest. And I've talked about this before, that the healing of the world comes from each individual. So we have the power to affect it the same way the rich company affected it negatively with their self-serving actions having these really awful consequences. We can do the opposite by seeking our quest, by seeking enlightenment through the Grail within us, because the Grail is in all of us. I'm not even sure if it's an actual object. It's in me, it's in you, it's in beautiful nature, it's everywhere. So by tuning to this vibration of the Grail is how we can heal this wasteland. And the authors say, restoring the voices of the wells is accomplished when we make attempts to return to the primal communion between the world of time and the world of eternity by listening and attending. And I think that this is also about re-honoring that sacred hospitality. I think this has kind of come about recently in the past couple of years through Airbnb, which is so awesome, where that spirit is so alive in that. So many B&Bs I've stayed at, the hosts have been just absolutely incredible. And even if I haven't gotten to meet them, they'll leave a welcome gift or just be like, my home is yours. My most fond memories, I think, over my lifetime are in sharing meals and drinks with friends, family, strangers. It's that place of gathering and of giving and receiving to each other, because it's these bonds with each other and humanity that make the worlds go round. And of course, that's trickled into scripture with that famous line, love thy neighbor as thyself. So how can we do better loving our neighbors, helping our friends, loving our friends, being the best friend we can be, the best wife, the best husband, sister, mother, daughter, and keeping those sacred bonds and accords with each other. So not only following our quest, but following those principles will bring about this healing of the wasteland, and of course communing with nature as much as possible, because that is where the true voice of eternity lies, and it's where you can hear it the most. To conclude from the Elucidation, adventures will come to those who will seek what has never been found in this country nor told before. So here's to you on your quest and the adventures you seek. Just know that as you do that, you are attuning to that spirit of the Grail, the spirit of the maidens of the wells, the spirit of that ancient accord that we are now bringing back into reality, I really truly believe, at this dawning of a new age. And we're all an integral part of that. So I hope you got value from this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. And if you did, as always, leave a comment. I love to hear from you. Like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next episode. Much love.